You are welcome to yet another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. In the courtroom where justice is meant to be blind, there are moments when the mask slips. When the very words of those sworn to uphold the law lay bare the bias and contradiction that infect the system. One such moment occurred during R. Kelly's New York appeal, a moment subtle to the casual observer but seismic in its implication to anyone truly listening. It was a moment that should make every believer in due process pause. Attorney Jennifer Bonjean stood firm and clear in her argument. The 240-month sentence imposed on R. Kelly was egregiously above the standard sentencing guidelines. She challenged not only the sentence's length but also its fairness, reasonableness, and its reflection of a larger pattern of prejudice against her client. She pointed to the inconsistency of applying such an extreme sentence, and the seeming retaliation that came with it. Retaliation not grounded in legal logic but in moral panic and public vengeance. But it was the response of one of the appeal judges that truly laid bare the heart of the issue. Rather than engaging directly with Bonjean's argument that the sentence was far in excess of the norm, the judge posed a hypothetical. A warning cloaked in judicial curiosity. If this case were to be sent back for resentencing, the judge suggested the original trial judge could in theory start over. And worse, that judge could now decide that R. Kelly's Chicago sentence, already 20 years, could be served consecutively with the 30-year New York sentence. Not concurrently as it stood. In plain terms, 50 years instead of 30. This wasn't a neutral comment. This wasn't a procedural observation. This was a threat. Whether the judge meant it consciously or not, the implication was unmistakable. The judge was essentially warning Bonjean and R. Kelly that to appeal this sentence might come at a greater cost. That the very act of seeking justice, or of challenging a disproportionate sentence, might result in a harsher outcome. That by resisting an unfair sentence, one risks provoking the wrath of the system itself. But this comment reveals far more about the system than perhaps the judge intended. Because in that moment two fundamental truths were exposed. First, the acknowledgement, whether veiled or not, that the trial judge had room to retaliate. That even in the upper echelons of the judicial system, there is an awareness that certain judges are capable of punishing defendants not on the basis of law but based on how hard they defend themselves. Second, that this threat of retaliation is not only known but normalized, and that it is spoken about matter-of-factly as though it's just part of the game. The suggestion that an appeal, which is one of the few tools available to a defendant to seek fairness, might lead to a worse outcome, is not justice. It is coercion. In any properly functioning justice system, the appeal process is meant to correct errors and not to create fear. It exists as a safeguard, a pillar of fairness, and a check on potential abuse at trial. Appeals are not meant to punish those who dare to use them. That's not just a legal principle. It's a moral one. When a judge suggests that an appeal could result in a worse sentence, it flips that principle on its head. It suggests that justice is not about fairness but obedience. That the defendant must accept whatever sentence is handed down, no matter how disproportionate, or risk facing something even worse. And that is precisely what Bonjean was pushing back against. The 240-month sentence was not only excessive by guideline standards, it was excessive by any measure of proportional justice. It was not a sentence aimed at rehabilitation. It was not one crafted with the measured logic the law requires. It was instead a symbolic punishment, which is not what the law should be about. But Bonjean did what any competent principled defense attorney should do. She called it out. She stood in that courtroom and challenged the injustice. And in response, she was met with a chilling implication: be careful what you wish for. The fact that the appeal judge floated this scenario reveals something dark and deeply troubling, a belief that a trial judge might retaliate simply because their prior sentence was questioned. That a new sentence could be worse not because the facts justify it, but because the system doesn't like being challenged. And make no mistake, this is not how justice is supposed to work. This is not how the Constitution intended appeals to function. Appeals are by design a mechanism to correct wrongs, not to invite vengeance. The idea that asserting one's right to appeal could provoke judicial revenge is a betrayal of that system. More than that, it confirms what many have long suspected, that R. Kelly's case has not been handled with neutrality. That the scales of justice in his case have been tipped not by the facts of the case, but by the emotions and optics surrounding it. That instead of blind justice, what we've witnessed is a justice system all too aware of public sentiment and all too willing to punish R. Kelly harshly, not based on law, but based on who the defendant is. And in this context, the judge's comment was not just inappropriate. It was revelatory. It exposed the mindset operating behind the curtain. A mindset where fairness is conditional. Where justice is not applied evenly. And where challenging a miscarriage of justice might be interpreted not as a right but as a provocation. This raises the most profound and unsettling question of all. If even appellate judges believe that retribution is possible, if they believe it enough to say it out loud in court, then how can we trust that the process itself is fair? Because here's the bottom line. If a judge can openly suggest that R. Kelly might receive a harsher sentence simply for exercising his right to appeal, then we are no longer talking about justice. We are talking about power. About intimidation and about control. That judge's comment should have caused alarm across every legal circle because it tells us that beneath the surface level talk of justice and due process, there is an undercurrent of something else. Something unspoken but deeply entrenched. It tells us that the defendant is not being judged solely on the evidence but on his willingness to comply. And when a man's freedom and his very life is at stake, that is not just a problem. It's a crisis of justice. Jennifer Bonjean understood this. That's why she stood up and called it out. That's why she continues to fight not just for R. Kelly but for the very principle that justice must remain blind. That every defendant, no matter how unpopular, deserves fair treatment under the law. And if the appeal judge's comment teaches us anything, it's that the fight is not just about this sentence or even this case. It's about restoring integrity to a process that too often punishes dissent and rewards submission. It's about calling out the subtle ways in which power is abused. Because justice doesn't die with a gavel. It dies with silence. And we cannot be silent when the very people entrusted to ensure fairness begin to hint at vengeance. We cannot accept a system where appeal becomes a gamble, and where the price of speaking out is greater than the injustice itself. R. Kelly has a right to appeal. He has a right to challenge an excessive sentence, and he has the right to do so without fear that his punishment will grow worse just because he dared to ask for fairness. That is what this moment revealed. And that is why it matters not just for R. Kelly, but for every defendant out there. For every citizen and every believer in due process. Because if the system can suggest retaliation for one man's appeal, then it can do the same to anyone, and that's not justice. That's tyranny dressed in a robe. That is all we had for you today on What's Your Say? To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.